The wind at Fort Defiance Station howled like it carried the last prayers of lost souls, clawing at Tien Nantan's shawl as she stood alone on the cracked wooden platform. Her boots had split somewhere between Flagstaff and Here and Now, her blistered feet stung with each step on the sun-baked boards. The train that brought her screaming and clanking across hundreds of miles had pulled away 10 minutes ago. Nothing remained of it but the scent of soot and a whisper of iron in the dust. She scanned the horizon, her eyes stinging not just from the wind, but from the truth she could no longer ignore. No one had come. Victor Harrow was supposed to be here. In his letters, he called her darlin', talked about wide skies and clean starts, promised her a cabin, a ring, and a warm fire after years of cold hunger. She had folded those 4 letters so many times the paper had thinned like old skin. Now she had them pressed against her ribs beneath her dress, but they felt heavier than the rifle she'd once carried through the canyons during raids. The white woman behind the ticket counter hadn't met her eyes when she asked again if Mr. Harrow had left any word. She just shook her head and slid the window shut like slamming a lid on a coffin. A voice rang out behind her, brittle as dry bone. "Another one, huh?" Tien turned slowly. An old Navajo woman leaned against a cane beside a stack of cornmeal sacks. Her silver hair was braided thick down her back eyes, sharp as obsidian. Tien didn't answer. "He sent for you too," the woman continued, not unkindly. "Victor Harrow's got a habit of ordering women like he orders flour. When he gets tired of them, he throws them out, or they vanish." Tien's lips didn't move, but something inside her twisted. Her fists clenched the handle of the frayed bag at her side. Everything she owned was inside. A single dress, a comb carved from juniper, her mother's bone earrings, and a tin of herbs she had nearly starved protecting. "I'm not here to be anyone's wife," Tien said finally, her voice calm as the mesa wind, but threaded with iron. "I'm here because I ran out of road behind me." The woman gave a short nod, like that was the only truth worth saying. The platform had emptied except for a pair of drunk cowhands arguing over a spilled bottle and 2 barking dogs nipping at the sun. The wind kicked up a swirl of dust so fine it settled in Tien's mouth. It tasted like ashes. She turned her back to the tracks and stepped down, not knowing where to go. Her heart pounded a rhythm she knew too well, fear hard and fast, pulsing behind her ribs like a war drum. She was no stranger to being alone. But this was worse than being hunted. It was being invisible, forgotten. The train gone. No one waiting. No path forward but sand. She took 2 steps before her knees buckled. Not from weakness, but from something colder, a betrayal so complete, it left nothing to stand on. She caught herself before she fell, fingers digging into the post of the platform. Her knuckles went white, but she didn't let the tears fall. "Don't you cry," she whispered to herself in Apache. "Not here, not now, not in front of them." A sob cut through the air, but it wasn't hers. Tien froze. The sound came again, smaller this time, raw, like a wounded bird. She turned and saw a boy running toward her from across the street, his arms flailing, face streaked with tears and dust. He couldn't have been more than 7, thin, wild-haired, barefoot, his small chest heaving. "Mama," he cried. "Mama, please don't leave again." Before she could react, he slammed into her with the force of a flood, wrapping his arms around her waist and burying his face in her skirts. His whole body trembled against her. "Mama," he whispered again, the word torn from the deepest part of him. "I prayed you'd come back. I prayed every night." Tien's heart stopped. She hovered, hands unsure, caught between instinct and shock. His little fingers dug into the fabric of her dress like he was trying to hold the world together with his grip. A man's voice shouted behind them. "Ellen, stop, son, wait." She looked up. The man storming toward them was tall and lean, broad-shouldered under a faded blue workshirt soaked through with sweat. A beard covered the lower half of his face, dark and unkempt, and his eyes, fierce, sharp, and sun-worn, locked onto her like a weapon drawn. But when he saw the boy clinging to her, something shattered behind his expression. "Elan," he said, breathless now. "That's not—" He stepped forward, reaching for the child's shoulder, but hesitated. Tayan saw it, the pause, the flicker of confusion. Recognition, the way his eyes widened, then softened, then turned to stone again. The boy wailed. "She looks like her papa. She has her eyes." I knew she'd come back. The man fell still. Tayan finally found her voice. "I'm not your mother, child," I know, Elan whispered, "but you feel like her." The words pierced her deeper than they should have. The boy's tears had soaked through her skirt into her skin. Something warm and terrifying bloomed in her chest. The man stepped forward again, and this time his voice was quieter. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. He does this sometimes, since his mother passed. We're not." Tayan lifted a hand, palm up, gentle. "He's grieving. I understand." He blinked at her. "Most people don't. I'm not most people." The man looked down at Aylin, whose arms still clung to her with feral desperation. The boy trembled, a storm held tight in small bones. "I'm Caleb Finch," the man said. "That's my son. His mother's buried up at Iron Mesa." Tayan nodded once. "Tayan Nantan." He hesitated. "You waiting on someone here?" "No," she said, voice low. "Not anymore." They stood in silence, the boy between them, breathing like he'd run from the end of the world to find her. Tayan's heart beat to a rhythm she didn't recognize, not survival, not revenge. Something older, deeper, like roots cracking stone. Caleb said nothing for a long time. Then quietly, "I got a ranch. We got an empty room, and I could use help." Tayan didn't answer right away. She looked at the boy, then at the man, then at the cracked horizon where the train had vanished, leaving behind only smoke and questions. "I don't want charity," she said. "You won't get it," Caleb replied. Tayan nodded once. "Then I'll come." Elan's small hand reached for hers, and she didn't pull away. The boy smiled for the first time. As they walked toward the wagon, the wind shifted, and in the distance across the parched earth, storm clouds gathered. "Mama," the boy asked like it was the only word that could hold his world together. The wagon's wheels groaned over the dry earth as Tayan sat beside Caleb Finch in silence, the wind blowing grit across the open plain. Elan pressed against her side like her presence kept him stitched together, his small hand clutching her shawl. He hadn't said a word since they left Fort Defiance, but every few minutes he would look up at her, checking like a dream he feared might vanish. Tayan did not pull away. She kept her eyes fixed ahead, where jagged hills framed a wide valley. The land was stark, unforgiving. No trees, no buildings in sight. Just golden grass waving like fire, and the sky wide and colorless above them. It wasn't the land that scared her. It was the ache rising in her chest she didn't understand. Caleb drove in silence, his posture, rigid eyes locked forward. His hat cast a hard shadow over his face, but every so often she saw his jaw clench, as though he was wrestling something under the skin. The quiet stretched too long. "You don't talk much," Tayan said at last. Caleb gave a short grunt. "Words are like bullets. Don't waste them if you don't have to." Tayan almost smiled. "I've known men who sprayed bullets just to hear the sound." He didn't respond, but she caught the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. A crease of amusement quickly gone. They rode on. A jackrabbit darted across their path. Alan flinched and buried his face against her ribs. Tyann rested a hand gently on his back, feeling the sharp rise and fall of his breath. "Is he always like this?" she asked, voice quiet enough to keep the boy from hearing. "Not always," Caleb said low. "After Hannah died." He stopped speaking for a month. Then he started seeing her everywhere. Dark hair, brown eyes. A woman walks past the mercantile and he thinks it's her. He rubbed a calloused hand along the reins. He doesn't understand that the dead stay dead. Tyann didn't answer. Her own dead walked beside her every day. She just learned not to reach for them. The wagon crested a rise and the ranch came into view. The house sat on a slight slope, a two-story structure weathered gray, the porch sagging but standing. A stone chimney leaned slightly to one side. Behind it, a red barn slouched in the sun, its roof patched with mismatched shingles. Chickens scattered as they approached, and two horses stood under the thin shade of a cottonwood that had somehow survived. Caleb pulled the wagon to a halt and exhaled like he hadn't breathed the entire trip. "We're home," he said. Elon stirred and sat up. He looked at Tyann with wide, dark eyes. "This is where you live now." He said the words innocent but heavy. Tyann touched his hand. "This is where I work," she replied gently. "For now." Elon nodded slowly, repeating the words under his breath. But the way he said "for now" sounded like "please stay." Caleb came around the wagon and offered his hand. Tyann hesitated. Then she took it. His grip was firm, warm, real. Not the touch of a man who used women like currency. Not like Victor Harrow. Caleb Finch held her hand like it mattered. Like she mattered. She stepped down from the wagon, feet hitting the dirt. The air smelled of horses, dry grass, and something deeper, the scent of a house left grieving. Caleb carried her single bag and led her up the porch. The wood groaned beneath their steps. "Your room's upstairs," he said. "Second door on the right. It was the guest room." Tyann nodded, not asking who it had belonged to before. Inside the house was dim and cool, but heavy. The kind of heavy that clung to the walls and hung in the corners. There were signs of life dishes in the sink boots by the door, but also signs of absence. A shawl draped over the back of a chair. A child's drawing half-folded on a dusty table. Silence wrapped around everything like gauze. Caleb set her bag down and straightened awkwardly. "I'm not much of a host. Haven't had company since—" He didn't finish. "I'll make do," Tyann said. He nodded once and turned to go. Ilan stood in the hallway watching her. Tyann looked down at him, searching his face. He looked so much like his mother must have a patchy cheekbones, dark lashes, skin sun-kissed and wind-brushed. He was beautiful and broken in equal measure. "I'll see you at supper," Tyann said. Ilan stepped forward, arms hanging stiff by his sides. "You smell like sage," he whispered, "like my mama's blankets." Tyann crouched slowly to his level, holding his gaze. "My mother used to pack sage and cedar in my travel pouch. Said it kept the bad spirits off." Ilan nodded solemnly. "Mama used to hang it above the door." "Maybe we should do that here," Tyann said. He gave her a slow, serious nod, then turned and padded off down the hallway, feet barely making a sound. Tyann entered the room and closed the door. It was small. A single bed, a wooden chest, a cracked mirror, and a window that looked out toward the barn. The sheets smelled faintly of soap, though dust had settled on the sill. She dropped her shawl onto the bed and sank onto the mattress, letting herself breathe. The weight of the day pressed into her. No train to run to, no town to hide in, no letters to cling to. Just this house, this man, and this boy with eyes full of ghosts. She looked down at her hands. They had built shelters, skinned game, sewn hide, dug graves. They would work here too. Even if her heart wasn't ready, her hands would begin. Downstairs, she heard the muffled clatter of Caleb moving through the kitchen. A drawer opened-closed, a pan set down hard. Then a silence stretched again. She laid back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The house creaked around her like it was trying to remember how to breathe. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't even know if she would last the week. But she was here, and the boy had called her Mama. And something in her, something cracked and hollow, had answered. Grief hung in the rafters like dust unseen until the light hit just right. The smell of cedar smoke clung to the beams of the house as Tayen descended the stairs before dawn, bare feet silent on the wood. The air was still cool, untouched by the Arizona sun, but the walls carried heat not of warmth, but memory. It wrapped around the house like a breath held too long. She crossed into the kitchen, eyes adjusting to the dim. A kettle sat forgotten on the stove, soot-streaked. A tin cup rested on the table with yesterday's coffee dried at the bottom like a stain that wouldn't wash out. Tayen moved through the room like a ghost, in reverse, not haunting, but being haunted. She opened the back door and stepped outside. Iron mesa stretched wide-edged with silver morning light. The wind was soft now, carrying the scent of wild sage and horses. Somewhere nearby, a bird called out a single sharp cry. Tayen turned toward the barn. Inside, Caleb was already working. She watched from the door, arms crossed, as he shoveled hay into the stall. His shirt clung to his back. The man moved with the kind of purpose that looked like control, but Tayen recognized the rhythm. It was avoidance. A man who didn't want to be still. "You always start the day like it owes you something," she asked, voice even. Caleb didn't look up. "I don't wait for the sun to ask permission." She stepped inside. "I could help." He paused, turned. His eyes met hers for a beat too long. "Then I don't expect you to pull weight before you've had sleep." "I slept enough." "You looked like you'd been run over yesterday." Tayen took the pitchfork leaning against the beam and began turning the hay. Still alive. He didn't argue. They worked in silence, the only sound the rustle of straw and the occasional snort from the horses. "I didn't bring you here to clean stables," Caleb said finally. "You didn't bring me here at all," she replied. "I came because the world didn't give me another place to go." Caleb set down his shovel and leaned against the stall gate. He rubbed his face with one hand, like the conversation had turned heavier than the pitchfork. "I meant what I said about room and work. You can stay as long as you want, but I'm not expecting anything from you beyond that." Tayen stopped. Her hands rested on the fork handle, but her voice stayed cool. "And the boy, he expects more." Caleb flinched just slightly. He sees things that aren't there. He sees things he lost. That's different. He looked away, jaw tight. "I don't want him hurt again." "Then don't lie to him." "You think I'm lying?" "I think Tayen said you're trying to pretend this house isn't breaking at the seams." The words struck too hard, too fast. Caleb straightened his face, closing up like a gate slammed shut. "You've been here one night," he said quietly. "I've been in places like this for years," she returned. A room still holding its breath. A man too afraid to open the door all the way. A boy carrying grief like it's his only inheritance. They stared at each other, a storm building between them that neither wanted to name. Then a voice called from the porch, small, uncertain. Papa Elan stood barefoot on the threshold, rubbing his eyes with a fist. His hair stuck up in uneven clumps. He blinked at them, still half asleep. Caleb turned. "We're in the barn, son." The boy padded toward them. He stopped short of Tayen and looked up at her, then down at the hay. Can I help? Tyan crouched and offered him the fork. It's heavier than it looks. I'm strong, Elon said, setting his small shoulders. I can see that. He tried lifting it, managed to move a bit of straw before wobbling. Caleb stepped in. Why don't you feed the chickens first? He said gently. You'll knock yourself out with that thing. Elon pouted but nodded. As he left, he brushed Tyan's arm lightly with his hand, so quick it could have been accidental. But Tyan felt it. The touch. The anchor. Caleb watched his son disappear into the light. You think I'm too hard on him? He asked without turning. I think you're afraid he'll break if you look at him too long. Caleb was quiet for a while. I watched Hannah die, he said at last. Held her hand through 3 nights of fever. She told me she'd be fine. Told Elon too. And then she was gone by sunrise. His voice broke like gravel under a boot. He stopped speaking after that. Just stopped. Like words died with her. Tyan looked down at her hands. My brother was taken when I was 12. Soldiers came for him. They called it re-education. We never saw him again. My mother lit sage every day for a year. I stopped speaking too. But I didn't forget how. Caleb looked at her, then really looked. Like he hadn't known how much pain could echo. I didn't bring you here to be a mirror, he said. No, Tyan answered. But sometimes mirrors are the only way you see what's left. From outside came Elon's voice shouting triumphantly about eggs. Tyan moved toward the door. I'll cook something, she said. I can manage beans. I figured. She didn't smile. That's why I'll cook. Caleb let out something that might have been a laugh if it hadn't caught halfway out. Inside, Tyan swept through the kitchen like she belonged, even if she didn't believe it yet. She lit the stove, scrubbed a pan, found a sack of cornmeal in the cupboard. The biscuits weren't perfect. The flour was old, the butter low, but they were warm. Elon came in with straw stuck to his shirt and beamed at the smell. Real food, he shouted. Caleb entered behind him, wiping his hands on a rag. He paused at the table, surprised. You didn't have to, I know, Tyan said. I did it anyway. They sat. Elon tore into the biscuit like a boy who hadn't eaten well in months. Butter slicked his chin. Tyan handed him a cloth, which he ignored completely. Caleb watched the boy, then looked at her. These are good, he said. They're hot and not burned. That's a start. Caleb nodded slowly, and something passed between them, not a truce, not peace, but recognition. 2 people building something fragile, word by word, bite by bite. Later, Tyan wandered the hallway alone, her footsteps soft on the floorboards. She passed a door half open. Inside, she saw a writing desk covered in dust, a comb beside a cracked mirror, a shawl folded over a wooden chair. The air in the room smelled faintly of lavender and something else. Absence. She didn't enter, just stood there a moment, then turned away. The sun had risen fully now. Light poured through the east window, catching the corners of the house, making the dust dance like spirits. Tyan rolled up her sleeves and went to the basin. Her hands moved without needing to think. If this place was breaking, she would start mending. 1 room at a time. 1 boy. 1 father. 1 woman who still remembered how to fight the silence. She steeped the tea as her mother once had, to chase away shadows. The sun hadn't yet touched the tops of the cottonwoods when Tyan gathered sage from the garden. The wind was light, brushing her cheeks with the cool breath of dawn. She plucked each leaf with care, her fingers working by memory more than sight. The garden was overrun, wild mint tangled with old corn stalks, weeds sprouting between cracked rows. But there were still treasures hidden in the mess. Things that could heal. The air smelled of earth and life. She inhaled deeply, letting it settle her bones. Behind her, the door creaked open. Mama used to pick sage like that. Ilan's voice came soft, like a memory unwilling to disturb the morning. Tyann didn't turn around. Your mother had good hands. She said it was for keeping the spirits happy. She was right. He padded into the garden, barefoot, carrying a tin mug with both hands. He offered it to her. I brought water. Papa said it's too early for me to be out, but I said I needed to help. Tyann knelt and accepted the mug with a nod. Then help me pick. He crouched beside her clumsy fingers, plucking a sprig of mint and sniffing it. This one smells like the candies Mrs. Redbird sells at her store. Tyann smiled just a flicker. That's because it's peppermint. Can we make tea with it? We will. Together they filled a small bundle with herbs, sage, mint, lemon balm, and a few stalks of purple flowering basil that had somehow survived the heat. Tyann tied it off with twine from her pocket and led him back toward the house. Inside, she boiled the water and set 2 mugs on the stove's edge. The kitchen still bore signs of the night before: crumbs from biscuits, a chipped plate drying on the rack, a chair pushed askew, but it no longer felt like someone else's space. The warmth lingered longer now. Ilan sat on the stool beside the table, watching every movement. My mama used to hum when she made tea, he said, even when she was tired. Tyann stirred the leaves slowly. Do you remember the song, Sort of? I only know one part. He hesitated, then hummed just a few uneven notes, unsure and soft. Tyann closed her eyes, the sound hitting something deep. Not because of the melody, but the way it wavered. Like a child building a bridge back to something he couldn't reach. She picked up the tune low and even, a second line, not the same melody, but a harmony, something her mother had hummed in their tent, back when the mountains still felt like home. Ilan's face lit up. That's it. That's what it sounded like. She poured the tea, the scent of mint and sage rising in small clouds. It's a song for calling the light back. Does it work? It always worked for my mother. Tyann handed him the warm mug. So maybe it still does. He took a careful sip, lips puckering at the bitterness. It's kind of weird. Most medicine is. But it makes my chest feel warm. That's how you know it's working. From the hallway, heavy footsteps approached. Caleb entered, shirt half-buttoned, eyes still rough from sleep. What's that smell? He asked. Tea, Tyann said. Ilan helped pick the herbs. Caleb looked at his son, who sat straighter under the attention. Good work, Caleb said, rubbing a hand over his beard. Didn't know we had anything left in that patch. Most folks forget to look underneath the weeds, Tyann replied. But things survive anyway. Caleb met her eyes, something unreadable passing through him. Then he nodded once and stepped out to wash up before morning chores. Ilan leaned close. Papa doesn't talk much in the morning. He doesn't talk much any time. He used to. With Mama. Tyann looked at him. You miss her. Ilan didn't answer. He just stared down into the steam of his cup like it might show her face if he looked hard enough. I used to miss my brother, Tyann said. He was older. Used to carve animals for me from juniper wood. What happened? They took him, she said simply. The soldiers. Said he needed to go learn their ways. He never came back. Ilan's voice was barely a whisper. Did you cry? I did. Did it help? No. But I kept doing it anyway. He nodded like he understood more than a boy his age should. After breakfast, Tyann scrubbed the floorboards while Caleb hauled firewood. They didn't speak, but they moved in rhythm, one stacking, one sweeping, both working like silence was something sacred. Not empty, but shared. When the heat rose past noon, Tyann went to the well. The rope squeaked as she drew up the bucket, and she paused. There knelt in the dirt palms, cupped in the cold water. The taste was sweet, clean, and sharp. She let it rinse the sweat from her throat. Beyond the well, the garden waited. She walked its edge, studying the neglect. Most of the plants were wild now, some dead, others choked in vines, but a few showed signs of stubbornness. A tomato vine clung to the fence post. A row of carrots poked through cracked earth. Kneeling, she brushed the dirt aside with her fingers and uncovered the green tips of a hidden onion, still alive. She pulled weeds, not all of them, but enough to see the shape the garden once had. A curve in the rows, a path of stone markers, a broken wind chime under the fence post. Tyann stood wiping her hands on her skirt. Behind her, Caleb's voice cut across the space. "You know what you're doing. Enough to feed myself," she said. He walked closer, stopping a few paces behind her. Hannah used to call this her quiet church, said it was the only place God could hear her clearly. Tyann didn't turn. She was right, she said. Things grow here, even in dry places. He exhaled through his nose, a sound halfway between a sigh and a laugh. "She would have liked you. I'm not here to be liked." "I know. But still." They stood in silence a while longer, the wind lifting dust and flower petals alike. Then Caleb spoke, his voice lower. "You planning to stay long? I haven't planned anything in a very long time." "That's fair." He turned to go, then hesitated. "Ilan sleeps better when he knows you're in the house." Tyann's throat tightened. She nodded, unable to speak. That evening, as the sun sank behind the ridge, Tyann sat by the window and watched Elend stack stones into little towers beside the porch. His movements were careful, as if balance meant something more than play. Inside the house, the scent of tea still lingered. She pulled out her mother's leather pouch and tucked a sprig of sage under the windowsill, not to keep the ghosts out, but to remind them they weren't the only ones who had ever stayed behind. There are silences that hold more danger than any scream. The first time Tyann saw the rider, it was nearly dusk. The light was thin, painting the valley in bruised gold, and the dust behind the hooves caught the sun just enough to shimmer. She stood on the porch with a basket of washed linens at her feet, watching the shape approach across the roadless stretch of earth, stirring something deep in her bones that wasn't quite fear, but wasn't far off. Caleb came out a moment later, wiping his hands on a rag. "You see that?" Tyann asked, her voice quiet but tight. He followed her gaze. The rider was still too far to make out clearly, but even from a distance there was something unnatural about his pace, unhurried, yet deliberate. Not a traveler, not a neighbor, not someone who expected to be welcomed. "Go inside," Caleb said. She didn't move. "I said go." It was the first time his voice had carried edge. Tyann looked at him. His face wasn't angry, it was alert, set, like something inside him had gone still and hard, ready to meet a storm. She stepped into the house, leaving the basket on the porch. Elend was inside, sketching horses on the back of an old ledger sheet. Tyann crossed to him, crouched, and laid a hand on his shoulder. "Upstairs now," she said. "Stay by the window, but don't let yourself be seen." He blinked up at her. "What's wrong? Just a visitor your papa needs to speak to." Ilan opened his mouth to argue, but saw something in her face and thought better of it. He climbed the stairs without another word. Outside, the rider had reached the gate. He didn't dismount, just sat atop a lean gray horse, dust crusted on his boots, his hat low over his eyes. He looked like a man carved out of shadow. Caleb stepped off the porch and walked toward him slowly. Tyann moved to the window and peered through the curtain. She couldn't hear the words, but she could read the body language. The rider leaned down slightly, gesturing with one hand, while Caleb stood firm, arms at his sides but shoulders rigid. Then the rider laughed, not loud, but sharp, like flint on steel. He leaned back in the saddle, said one more thing, then turned his horse without waiting for a reply. The animal trotted off slow and confident, like it knew it wasn't done here. Caleb didn't move until the rider disappeared behind the ridge. When he came back inside, Tyann was waiting near the door. Who was that? He looked past her for a moment, as if answering her meant pulling something heavy from the deep. Wes Lanton, he said finally. Used to ride for a man named Burdett up near San Carlos. Heard he'd gone quiet after the war. Guess not. Does he have business with you? Caleb let out a breath through his nose. He thinks he does. Tyann folded her arms. What kind of business? Caleb met her eyes. The kind that ends in blood if you're not careful. The words fell heavy between them. She didn't press. He didn't explain. That night she double-checked the lock on the back door. Drew the curtains tighter. She steeped more sage not for tea but to burn, let the smoke rise through the rafters and into the bones of the house. Upstairs, Elon clutched his carved horse while he slept, his face tense even in dreams. Tyann sat near the fireplace, arms crossed, eyes on the door. The silence had changed. Not the calm of healing, but the pause before something shatters. The next day passed without word, but no one spoke of peace. Caleb took the rifle from above the hearth and cleaned it at the table, each movement slow and precise. Tyann kept Elon close, though she didn't tell him why. He asked once about the man on the horse. A friend of Papa's, he guessed. Tyann shook her head. Not a friend, not an enemy yet, but someone who brings bad air with him. Ellen thought on that. Like a storm. Yes, she said. Exactly like that. Later they went to the creek to gather water. The bucket creaked on the rope and birds scattered from the branches. Tyann kept her back to the valley, eyes on the trees. Her hand never left the handle of the knife at her hip. She hadn't needed it in months, but the feel of it grounded her. They returned to find the garden gate open. Tyann froze. Her fingers brushed Ellen's shoulder and nudged him gently behind her. Caleb was already outside, eyes scanning the horizon. He moved toward the gate, slowly crouched, and touched something near the latch. A horseshoe print. Fresh. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. They ate dinner with their ears tuned to every creak of the floorboards. Why now? Tyann asked quietly as they cleared the table. Caleb stood at the sink, the lantern light catching the scars along his forearm. He knew Hannah, he said. They grew up in the same mining town. She left. He didn't. She built something. He broke things. And now he said he heard I had a new bride. His voice dropped. Said he wanted to pay his respects. But the way he said it, Tyann felt her stomach twist. He's not here for me, she said. No, Caleb said, drying his hands. He's here to take back something he thinks he owns. The words tasted bitter. Tyann stepped out onto the porch that night and looked at the sky. The stars blinked in silence, uncaring and bright. Somewhere out there, Wes Lanton was probably camped in the hills, smoking a roll, laughing at the way fear seeps into homes like water under doors. She didn't fear him. She feared the way silence made space for men like him. The next morning, the wind shifted. A hawk circled above the barn. Tyann took it as a sign. They weren't just waiting anymore. They were being watched. When someone walks through your door with a smile but no shadow, you set the table but keep a blade under the cloth. The knock came just after breakfast. Not the sharp rap of a friend, nor the hesitant tap of a lost traveler. It was deliberate, 3 strikes evenly spaced like a hammer on wood. Tyann set her cup down and looked at Caleb, who had already risen from the table. He moved to the rifle rack by the door but left the weapon in place. "I'll answer," he said. Tyann didn't argue. She reached down and touched Aylin's shoulder. "Upstairs," she whispered. He looked at her wide-eyed, but obeyed. Caleb opened the door. Wes Lanton stood on the porch, freshly shaven, his coat buttoned high. A smile stretched across his face like it had been carved there and stuck too long. Behind him were two other men, one older with a scar from temple to chin, and the other younger, all twitchy shoulders and narrow eyes. They didn't bother hiding their guns. "Mornin', Caleb," Wes said smoothly, like he'd come offering pie. "You gonna invite me in, or do I have to sit on the step like a stray?" Caleb didn't move. "You're not welcome here, Wes." Wes clicked his tongue. "That's no way to greet kin." "We're not kin. We shared a bed once removed." Caleb's jaw tightened. Tyann stepped forward, then placing herself at Caleb's side. Wes's eyes moved to her and stayed there. "Well, now," he drawled. "Ain't you the one they've been talking about in town, the ghost bride? Mail order out of nowhere. Pretty in a storm-weathered kind of way." Tyann said nothing. She just stared. Wes grinned wider. Silent type. "I like that. Says you know how to listen." She stepped closer. "I listen real well, and I hear you're the kind of man who talks until someone makes him stop." The younger man behind Wes chuckled. The older one didn't. Caleb's voice cut between them. "Say what you came to say, Wes." Wes finally looked back at him. "We're passing through. Thought we'd pay respects, see the woman, maybe share some whiskey, talk about old times." "You were never welcome when Hannah was alive," Caleb said. "You sure as hell aren't welcome now." Wes's smile slipped for half a second. Then he took a slow step forward. "I heard about what happened. About her being gone. Tragic. Real shame." His voice dropped a little. "But some things don't stay buried. Some debts don't go away." Tyann felt the shift in Caleb, the tension rising, the old soldier behind the quiet man waking up. "There's no debt here," Caleb said. Wes tipped his hat. "We'll be at the abandoned station up north. Maybe we'll talk another day. Or maybe I'll come back with questions you don't want me to ask in front of that boy of yours." He stepped off the porch. The younger one sneered as he passed. "Cute kid. Hope he don't pick up your bad habits." The older man met Tyann's eyes. He didn't speak, but his stare was cold and calculating, like he was measuring something she couldn't see. They rode off without looking back. Caleb shut the door and locked it. Tyann exhaled slow and even. "They'll be back," she said. "I know." He turned toward her, his face unreadable. "There's more to this than just words, I figured," she said. Caleb nodded once. "I need to ride out, talk to someone who might know where Wes has been camped. You can't leave us here." "I won't be gone long." Tyann stepped in front of him. "If he comes while you're gone, you do whatever you have to. Protect Aylin. Protect yourself." "I will." He reached for the rifle, slung it over his shoulder, and went out through the back door. The silence that followed was worse than Wes's knock. Tyann spent the morning checking locks, securing windows, boiling water for tea she wouldn't drink. Ilan followed her from room to room, silent as her shadow. At noon, he finally asked, "Is that man coming back?" She didn't lie. "Probably. Will he hurt us? Not if I can help it." Ilan stared at the floor. "I'm not scared. I just don't want to lose this house." Tyann knelt in front of him. "Why?" "Because it's the only place where Papa laughs sometimes." Her throat tightened. "Then we'll keep it." She walked him to the barn and showed him how to latch the back gate from inside. She taught him which boards squeaked and where to step soft. She gave him a whistle carved from willow and told him to blow it only if she didn't come back from checking the perimeter. It was a quiet kind of readiness, not loud, but deep. By dusk, the wind had picked up, dragging leaves across the dirt like whispers. Tayenne sat on the porch, knife in her boot and her mother's pouch of herbs at her side. She braided the last of the dried sage, whispering old words she hadn't spoken since childhood. Words meant to bind spirits or drive them away. The hawk circled again, watching, waiting. Just before the sun dipped, a single horse crested the ridge. Not Caleb. Wes. Alone. He didn't dismount. Just sat there staring across the yard, his eyes unreadable in the dimming light. Tayenne didn't rise. She didn't flinch. She simply watched him back. A long moment passed. Then he turned his horse and vanished into the trees. She waited until night fully swallowed the mesa. Then she stood and whispered to the wind, "I see you even in the dark." The desert doesn't echo lies, it drinks them and waits for the truth to rot its way to the surface. The sun rose hard and red the next morning, bleeding across the sky like an omen. Tayenne stood at the window watching the horizon as if West Lanton might crawl out of it. The basin shimmered under the early heat, but it was quiet, too quiet. No bird song, no wind through the cottonwoods, just the dry breath of a land holding itself still. Caleb hadn't returned. She knew he might not. Men like Wes didn't follow rules or schedules, and neither did the men who once rode with him. Tayenne had seen enough war, enough raids to recognize the signs. The silence was a drawstring pulling tight before the break. Elon came downstairs, his carved horse clutched tight in one hand. "Is Papa back?" She shook her head. Elon didn't ask anything more. He simply stood there, too young to carry this weight, but old enough to understand it. They spent the morning inside Tayenne cleaning the rifle again, while Elon practiced holding the knife she'd shown him. She watched his hands, how he gripped the hilt too tight, how his eyes darted to the door every few minutes. "I don't want to hurt anybody," he said suddenly. "You don't have to," she replied. "You just have to be ready." He looked down. "Will they come today? I don't know." She wanted to lie, to say no or maybe or we'll be fine. But Elon wasn't the kind of child who needed shielding. He needed truth, because it was coming. By mid-afternoon, Tayenne saddled the mule and rode south to the old switchback trail that led toward the station. She needed to know if Caleb had made it to Tohachi, if he'd found help, or if he'd been caught in the web Wes was spinning. The trail was dust-choked and narrow, winding through brittle mesquite and rockfall. Every rustle made her hand twitch toward her rifle. She passed an old water trough half buried in sand, a black vulture perched on its edge. It didn't move as she rode past, just turned its head, slowly watching. 2 miles down the ridge, she found what she feared: a spent shell casing, then blood. It stained the gravel in an irregular smear leading toward a dry wash. She dismounted, tied the mule, and followed the trail on foot, rifle ready. 50 yards in, she found a horse, Caleb's, lying on its side, one leg mangled, still breathing but barely. She crouched beside it, whispering a prayer in Diné, pressing her hand against its neck. The beast trembled once, then went still. Tayenne stood, heart-hammering. No sign of Caleb, no fresh prints. Whoever had ambushed him knew how to cover their tracks, or didn't care if they were followed. She returned to the mule and mounted up, circling wide back toward the house. If they had him, they wouldn't kill him right away. Wes was the kind who preferred leverage. He'd want her afraid, off balance. But fear wasn't what she felt now. It was heat. Cold at the core, fire at the edges. She rode harder, dust biting her throat, until the house came into view. The sun had shifted behind a cloud bank, casting the mesa in bruised shadow. And there, standing by the garden fence, was a stranger. Not Wes. Someone older hunched at the shoulder with a wide-brimmed hat and a crooked stance. He held a jug of water in one hand and a shovel in the other. Tayen slowed, heart thudding. The man didn't move, just lifted his chin slightly and waited. She stopped a dozen yards out, rifle across her lap. "You lost?" "No, ma'am," he said in a dry rasp. "I'm exactly where I need to be." She stared. His face was dark with sun, his eyes set deep. There was something strange in them, familiar but not soft, like the wind over old bones. "I ain't here to harm the boy," he said, reading her thoughts. "Then why are you here?" He shrugged. "Wes Lanton's riding with a sickness. He poisons the ground he walks. Folks like me, we feel that kind of rot coming. You know him better than most. Worse than some." He stepped forward one pace. "My name's Garrison," he said. "Used to ride. Not proud of it. Left the life before it left me in a ditch." Tayen watched him, weighing his words. "I heard about Hannah," he went on. "He was sweet on her once. Not in a real way. In a possession kind of way. When she chose Caleb West, took it like theft. Men like that keep wounds like tally marks." She dismounted, not lowering her guard. "Why now? Because he's stirring old ghosts. And some of us got no stomach for watching another fire burn just to see what'll crawl out of the ashes." Tayen met his gaze. "You offering help, I'm offering warning, and maybe a little more if you'll have it." She considered, then nodded once. "Come in." Inside, Ellen watched the stranger carefully, but didn't flinch. Tayen poured water and sat at the head of the table. Garrison remained near the door. "I found Caleb's horse," she said. "Wounded. Alone." Garrison nodded. "Wes don't like mess. If he killed him, you'd have found the body. He's holding him. For you." Tayen's throat tightened. "He'll want a trade." Garrison's voice was low. "But he don't understand the value of what you're worth. He thinks women are property. Weakness. He's wrong." She looked up. "How do we beat him?" The older man's eyes gleamed. "We let him bring the storm. Then we show him what survives it." Outside, the wind picked up again, not howling, but ready, waiting for the match. Some storms don't come from the sky, they ride in on two legs, wearing a smile too wide, and leave the ground salted behind them. The wind clawed at the window panes that night, dry and sharp as broken teeth. Tayen sat at the table with a map spread in front of her, the inked lines trembling in the flicker of the oil lamp. Garrison leaned over it, pointing with a scarred finger toward the northern ridge above the old train station. "They've been camping near here," he said. "Burdett's old tunnel runs through that slope. Abandoned mine. Dry, easy to hide in. Only one way in or out unless you're a ghost." Tayen traced the ridgeline with her eyes, her jaw set. "Then that's where they've got him. Likely." Ilan lay on the cot nearby, pretending to sleep, but his fingers twitched with every gust outside, and his breathing was too careful. "We have 2 rifles," she said. "One decent shot mine. One dead man if he thinks I'll let him take another inch of my life." Garrison gave a short nod. "You've got steel, girl." "But Wes, he's not just mean. He's cunning. He's been twisting men into knots since he was 15. Got a way of talking that makes good men doubt their boots and bad men follow him straight to hell." "I'm not a man," she said. "No," Garrison agreed. "You're something harder to break." She looked out the window again. The mesa lay still in the dark, but the wind carried scents, creosote dust, a trace of horses. Movement out there somewhere. "I want to strike first," Tayen said. "Then we need to be gone by first light." Garrison rolled up the map, tucked it under his coat. "I'll go make sure the trail's clear. Meet me by the cottonwood grove before dawn." Tayen walked him to the door. Before he left, he paused and looked down at her. "Don't let the boy see your fear," he said. "Let him see your fire." When he vanished into the night, Tyan closed the door and bolted it. Then she sat beside Ilan and laid a hand on his shoulder. "You heard?" He nodded. "You're going after Papa?" "Yes, I want to come." "No." He sat up fast. "I can help. I can watch. I can—" "You can survive," she said, sharper than she meant. Her hand softened on his back. "You'll stay here. If I don't return in 2 days, you ride to Tohachi, find the marshal, or Annie at the trading post. I don't want to be alone. You won't be. Not really. I'm with you even when I'm not." His eyes filled, but he blinked the tears back. She leaned down and pressed her forehead to his. "Keep your heart steady, little bird." He nodded. "I will." Before dawn, Tyan stepped into the cold, with a pack strapped to her shoulder, her rifle over her back, and a knife tucked into her boot. The stars were fading and the moon was low, the last silver witness before blood touched the dirt. She met Garrison beneath the cottonwoods. He had 2 horses saddled. One was old and sturdy, the other lean and fast. They rode in silence, cutting north along the dried riverbeds skirting the rocks to avoid leaving prints. The sun rose behind them, slow and heavy, casting long blue shadows. By mid-morning, they reached the edge of the canyon, overlooking the abandoned mine. Garrison pulled up his horse and dismounted, crouching behind a crumbling stone ledge. Tyan followed, peering through the spyglass he handed her. Below, near the mouth of the mine, were 3 horses tied loosely to a mesquite. A fire still smoldered. One man paced, rifle slung low. Another leaned against a barrel, chewing something with lazy menace. The 3rd man was Caleb. He sat against a boulder, his hands tied behind his back, his face bruised but upright. Blood crusted the edge of his shirt collar, but his eyes were open, alive. Tyan lowered the glass. Her stomach knotted, but her hands were steady. "There," she said. "We move before they see us." "Not yet," Garrison said. "Let them grow comfortable, bored, then they get sloppy." They waited. The sun climbed higher. One of the guards walked off to piss behind the rocks. The other poured something from a flask and took a long pull. Tyan's breath slowed. She saw her shot. She rose halfway, steadied her rifle on the ledge, and squeezed the trigger. The guard with the flask dropped a red blossom blooming on his chest. The sound cracked through the canyon like a whip. The second man spun, shouting. Garrison fired before the words left his mouth, dropping him clean. Tyan was already moving, sliding down the slope boots, catching on loose shale. She hit the bottom, running rifle in hand. Wes burst from the mine entrance, shouting, dragging Caleb upright, with one hand a pistol pressed to his jaw. "Don't come closer," Wes screamed. Tyan didn't stop. "I'll kill him." She raised her rifle, stared down the barrel. Her finger tightened. "Go ahead," she said. Wes's eyes flicked. Tyan saw the fear. "You never wanted him dead," she said. "You wanted him to suffer. You wanted me to beg, but I won't. Not for you." Wes's grip faltered. In that heartbeat, Caleb twisted, slammed his head backward into Wes's face. The gun fired wild. Tyan dropped to one knee and fired once straight into Wes's shoulder. He spun and dropped with a scream. Caleb kicked the pistol away and staggered to his feet. Tyan ran to him, cut his bindings, wrapped an arm around his back. Garrison appeared from behind the boulders, rifle aimed at the writhing form of Wes on the ground. "Let me finish it," Tyan said, her breath ragged. Garrison stared, then nodded, but Caleb laid a hand on hers. "No," he said. "Let him live with the fact that we beat him. Let the desert finish the job." Tyan looked down at Wes, his mouth bloodied, his eyes wide with hatred and disbelief. "You're done here," she whispered. They turned and walked into the rising sun, not as fugitives, but as the ones who survived the storm. Healing doesn't sound like bells or songbirds. It's quieter, like the slow stitching of skin over an old wound. The air was different now, not just in scent or temperature, but in the way it moved, gentler, almost hesitant. The wind no longer howled warnings. It whispered questions. Tyann felt it before she heard it, a stillness inside her that wasn't absence, but the echo of surviving. They returned to the ranch with Caleb bruised and limping, but alive. Garrison rode behind them, saying little. Wes Lanton had been left behind in that canyon, gunless, bleeding, with nothing but his rage to keep him company. Tyann had looked back only once. By the time they reached the cottonwood grove, the sky had stretched pale with late afternoon, and the sun had softened its glare into something that seemed almost kind. Ilan came bursting from the house before the horses fully stopped, his face wide with fear and hope tangled together. When he saw Caleb, he froze. Then he ran. "Papa," he cried, slamming into Caleb's legs. Caleb winced at the pressure, but wrapped both arms around his son and dropped to his knees. "I'm here," he murmured. "I'm home." Tyann stood back, watching the reunion unfold with her heart cracked open in too many places to count. She pressed a hand to her chest, as if to hold the feeling still before it slipped away. Inside, the house smelled of stew and cedar. Tyann had set water to soak beans that morning before leaving, more out of habit than hope. Now the scent felt like a gift, proof that life had kept going. She busied herself in the kitchen, chopping wild onions and stirring the pot, letting the rhythm of the task calm her nerves. Garrison sat at the edge of the porch, sharpening his knife in long, even strokes, his eyes distant. "You staying long?" she asked him when she brought him a tin cup of coffee. "Not more than a day," he said. "I'm not made for quiet." "You earned it." "I earned a grave long ago," he replied without looking up. "But I reckon I'll take a few sunrises more." She didn't press him. Some men carried silence the way others carried scars, and Garrison was both. Inside, Aelin refused to leave Caleb's side. He fetched bandages when asked, stirred the stew, even insisted on sleeping on the floor next to the bed that night, his tiny hand resting on his father's arm like an anchor. Tyann let him. The storm had passed, but the wreckage remained. Caleb's body bore the marks, purple bruises, torn skin, a cracked rib, but deeper wounds settled behind his eyes. She saw it in the way he flinched at certain sounds, how he stared into the middle distance when he thought no one was watching. Tyann knew the look. "You're not alone anymore," she told him softly as she washed his wounds that night. "I know," he whispered, "but it still feels like I'm waiting for something to break." "It won't," she said, hoping her voice could make it true. He turned his hand over fingers, brushing hers. "Everything I've done," he began, "everything I couldn't do." "You came home," she interrupted. "That's enough." He swallowed hard, then nodded. For the first time, Caleb slept through the night. Tyann stayed up, sitting by the fire, watching the light flicker across the walls, listening to the wind settle. Garrison had left before dawn, his saddle empty of words, but full of respect. He had nodded to her, tipped his hat to Aelin, and disappeared into the horizon like the last note of an old song. In the days that followed, the rhythm of the ranch returned slowly at first. Aelin helped feed the chickens and carry water from the well. Tyann worked the garden, replanting herbs crushed by dust storms. Caleb limped through chores, refusing to let pain keep him idle. He repaired the corral fence and rebuilt the shed door Wes had splintered weeks before. Each day stitched something broken a little tighter. At supper one evening, Aelin looked up from his plate and asked, "Will we stay here now?" Tyann and Caleb exchanged glances. Yes, Caleb said after a long pause. If Tyann wants to. Tyann set her fork down, looking at them both. The table felt too small to hold all the unspoken words, but she didn't need many. I'm not leaving, she said. This is our home. Ilan grinned. Caleb reached across the table and took her hand. Later that night, as she walked the fence line alone, Tyann looked up at the stars. They were sharp and clear, not blurred by sorrow or dread. She breathed deep. No footsteps behind her. No gunmetal dreams waiting in the dark. Just earth and wind and sky. But something tugged at her thoughts. A letter. A woman. Sister Ruth. They hadn't heard from her since that one note delivered by hand warning them of Wes's turn. Tyann had kept it folded in a drawer by her bed, words pressed so hard they scarred the paper. She needed to write back. Needed to thank the woman who had risked more than she knew. Inside, she lit a candle and sat at the small desk near the window. The paper was coarse, but the ink steady. She wrote slowly. Dear Ruth, he's alive. We are safe now, but not unchanged. Thank you for your courage, for the warning, for giving us time to fight. The land still holds the memory of pain, but it also grows new roots. Come see it for yourself if you can. There is room here. There is work. And there is family. She signed it with her name, and then paused. With a smile, she added one more line beneath it. Tyann Yazzie, mother of Aelin, wife to Caleb, keeper of this quiet storm. She folded the letter, sealed it, and placed it near the door to be sent with the next supply wagon into town. Then she stood and walked outside. The wind was back again, but soft this time. Like it had nothing left to prove. Tyann tilted her face into it, let it move her hair, her breath, her heart. Some storms didn't pass quickly, but some stayed just long enough to clear the air. Sometimes the past doesn't knock, it bursts in with mud on its boots and eyes that remember everything you'd rather forget. The knock on the door came just after dusk, when the light turned red and heavy across the mesa and the chickens had long since gone quiet. Tyann had been stirring a pot of sage and bean stew, humming something low and wordless. Caleb was mending a bridle in the corner. Ellen sat cross-legged by the fire, carving a whistle from juniper. The sound froze all of them. Not the wind, not an animal, a knock, measured, slow. Tyann reached for the rifle by the hearth as Caleb rose, eyes narrowing. Ilan looked up, confusion and worry flickering in his face. Are we expecting anyone? No, Caleb said. Tyann stepped quietly to the door, pressed her back against the frame and called out. Who is it? A voice answered, low and rough around the edges. Male. Name's Harlan Kitts. From Cholla Springs. Rode 20 miles with a parcel for a Tyann Yazzie. Tyann blinked. A name she hadn't heard in nearly 4 years. She glanced at Caleb, who nodded once, and moved to Ellen, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. She opened the door a crack. Outside stood a man in his 50s, tall and lean, with dust crusted into the seams of his coat and a wide-brimmed hat shading a weathered face. His horse waited behind him, reins draped loose over its neck. Tyann stepped out. What parcel? She asked. Harlan pulled a small oilskin-wrapped bundle from his saddlebag. Lady gave it to me near Flagstaff. Said it was important. She paid well. He handed it over without ceremony. Tyann turned it in her hands. The handwriting was unmistakable. Ruth's. The seal was broken intentionally, not by accident. Was anyone else with her? Tyann asked. Harlan shrugged. Didn't see. She looked tired but not scared. Said she had her own way of traveling. Tyann looked up sharply. When? 3 days ago. Her fingers clenched around the parcel. She nodded slowly. Thank you. Harlan tipped his hat. You've got a strong place here. Keep it that way. He mounted his horse, turned it with a nudge, and rode off into the growing dark. Back inside, Tayan unwrapped the parcel on the table. Inside was a letter, a pressed blue wildflower, and a warning. They're moving again. Not Wes. Others. Names he worked with. One in particular, Elroy Danton. Used to run supplies for Wes, but he's started something bigger now. Towns going quiet. Girls missing. They're headed toward the borderlands. I've seen what's left behind. I can't stay silent. If you're safe, stay safe. But if you still have fire, you'll know what to do. Tayan stared at the words, her pulse heavy in her ears. Who's Elroy Danton? Caleb asked quietly. A name Wes used once, when he thought I was too broken to remember. Caleb stepped beside her, reading over her shoulder. His jaw tightened. She's in trouble, he said. She's chasing trouble, Tayan corrected. But either way, she's alone. Tayan folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into the oilskin. The wildflower she held a moment longer, then placed between the pages of the Bible that sat dusty on the shelf. They didn't talk much that night. Ellen sensed the shift and grew quiet. He watched his parents with wide, darting eyes, uncertain where the worry began or ended. Tayan barely slept. She walked the porch 3 times, boots scuffing the dry wood eyes, scanning the dark, as if something might rise from it. The wind brought no comfort, only old memories in new clothes. By morning, she had packed a small satchel. Rifle, knife, flint, dried meat, a map. Caleb watched her from the barn. You sure? He asked. No, she said. But that doesn't matter. You don't owe her your life. She gave me back mine, Tayan replied. More than once. I should go with you. No, she said, turning to face him. You need to be here. For Elan. For the land. If this Danton is as dangerous as she says, someone needs to be rooted when the wind comes. Caleb's eyes burned with conflict, but he nodded. I'll keep the gates locked. Tayan crossed the distance between them and rested her forehead against his. I'll come back, she said, unless I can't. He pulled her close arms, wrapping around her in a grip that shook. I'll wait anyway. Elan stood by the fence when she mounted her horse. His eyes brimmed, but he didn't cry. Bring her home, he said. Tayan smiled. That's the plan. She rode west, through cactus and red rock, through dry gullies and sun-bleached plains. The wind picked up as the sun climbed. Buzzards circled high in the pale sky, casting shadows that looked like warnings. She reached the edge of an old settlement by late afternoon. Cholla Springs. Once a way station, now barely a memory. But someone had been there. Ashes in the hearth of a ruined saloon. Fresh tracks, boot prints, small and deliberate. Tayan dismounted, crouched beside them. The toe was worn in a way she recognized. Ruth had passed this way. She followed the tracks through the broken town and out past the well, down into a ravine that cut across the land like a scar. There, nestled in the rock, she found something that stopped her heart. A scrap of shawl. Ruth's, torn and dusted with blood. Tayan pressed her fingers to it and closed her eyes. Somewhere ahead, someone was hunting women again. And this time she wouldn't be a victim. She folded the fabric, tucked it into her pocket, and stood. Above her, the sun dipped lower, bathing the canyon in blood-colored light. Her boots crunched on gravel as she walked forward, not fast, but with a purpose sharp enough to cut stone. She was not the same girl Wes had broken, and whatever Elroy Danton had planned, he was about to learn that storms could come wearing a woman's face and a rifle across her back. Some paths aren't walked. They're carved through bone and ash by the ones who refuse to stay buried. The desert had long shed its warmth by the time Tien reached the canyon's edge. Darkness crept in without grace, swallowing color and distance alike. She huddled near a small fire flame's low eyes, scanning the ridgelines for movement. Her horse, tethered to a mesquite tree, shifted nervously, ears twitching to some sound she couldn't yet hear. The silence wasn't comforting. It was loaded, weighted, like something was waiting just out of reach. Tien laid the rifle across her lap. The fabric scrap in her pocket still carried the faintest trace of Lavender Ruth's favorite soap, but the blood on it had dried into something that turned her stomach. She hadn't seen another soul since Cholla Springs. Only tracks. Some from Ruth's small boots, some larger, deeper, and more of them than Tien liked. She didn't need to imagine what had happened. She'd lived a version of it once. The fire cracked softly. Her eyelids pulled heavy, but she refused to sleep. She couldn't. Not while Ruth might be out there hurt, trapped, or worse. The image of her friend, always so composed, so sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued, being dragged through this desolate land, made her grip the rifle tighter. A branch snapped nearby. She rose in a single motion, gun aimed. The figure that stepped into the firelight was lean, draped in a battered coat, his hands raised. "Easy," he said. "Don't shoot." She didn't lower the gun. "Name." "Ellis." "I was with Ruth." Tien's heart jolted, but her voice stayed flat. "Where is she?" Ellis looked like he hadn't slept in days. Dust clung to his lashes, and a deep cut curved over his cheekbone. "She's alive. For now." He knelt slowly beside the fire, careful not to make sudden moves. Tien circled, keeping her gun on him. "She told me about you," he added. "Said you had a sharp mouth and a sharper aim." "She's still breathing?" Tien asked. "Tell me where she is, or I'll bury you in this sand, and go find her myself." Ellis smiled grimly. "She's being held. Old outpost near the border, abandoned cavalry station. Danton's turned it into something foul. Women locked in, guards posted. They move 'em out at night. Ruth got caught trying to sneak in supplies." Tien's stomach twisted. She was trying to help them, she always was. His voice broke. "I was supposed to watch her back." Tien finally lowered the rifle, but her body stayed tense. "How many men?" 10, maybe 12. Half of 'em drunk half the time, but there's 2 you'll want to watch: Danton himself and a bastard named Holt. Likes the sound of his own fists." Tien squatted across from him, mapping the area in her head. "They expecting anyone not tonight. Next transport's not till the new moon. They get paid per head. Ruth said they're collecting girls for a buyer across the border." The fire spit a spark, but neither flinched. "I want her out," Tien said, "and I want them to burn." Ellis nodded. "Then we'll need help." "None coming. It's us. Then we'll need to be ghosts." Tien smirked faintly. "I was born in silence." They spent the next hour scrawling plans in the dirt with sticks marking sentry positions, gate angles, guard rotations as Ellis remembered them. Every detail could mean survival or failure. When they finished, Tien stood and slung her rifle over her back. "I'm going in before dawn," she said. Ellis stood too, swaying slightly from exhaustion. "I'll lead you through the wash. Gets you close without being seen." She gave him a nod. "You rest. I'll keep watch." He hesitated. "You're not what I pictured." Tien arched a brow. "That's so I pictured someone colder, meaner." She turned back to the fire. "I am. You just caught me looking for someone who mattered." He didn't reply. When the first blush of gray touched the horizon, they moved. The wash cut through sandstone and dry bramble, winding like a forgotten thought. Tien crouched, low feet, silent, Ellis guiding with gestures more than words. They passed a dead coyote half buried in dust. A skull hung on a fence post. Cow not human, but the message was the same. Keep out. Tyann ignored it. By the time they reached the final ridge, the outpost came into view, wooden buildings, sun-bleached and sagging, but the movement of armed men told her it was far from abandoned. She counted 5 patrolling outside, the rest likely inside or asleep. Ellis pointed toward a smaller shed near the far edge. She's in there. I saw them drag her inside last night. Still breathing then. Still breathing. That was enough. Tyann unlatched her satchel, pulled out a small bundle of dynamite sticks she'd salvaged from a mining site near the ranch weeks ago. They hadn't come looking for war, but war had a way of finding them. She handed Ellis 2 sticks. Fire in the north tower. Draw them off. He nodded grimly. Tyann slipped into the shadows and moved. She reached the edge of the outpost just as Ellis lit the first fuse. Boom! Screams. Guards ran, guns drawn, shouting into the smoke. Tyann bolted for the shed. She kicked in the door. Ruth lay curled in the corner, lips split, one eye swollen shut but alive. Tyann, she rasped. Tyann crossed the space in 2 strides and pulled her upright. We're getting out. About damn time. A bullet slammed into the wall behind them. Tyann dragged Ruth behind a stack of crates. She fired twice, dropped a man, then pulled Ruth toward the outer wall. Ellis appeared, face bloody but grinning. North gate's open. Let's run. They didn't argue. The 3 of them sprinted through the chaos, Tyann covering the rear, Ruth leaning hard on Ellis. Gunfire chased them, but they didn't stop. By the time they reached the canyon wash again, the outpost behind them roared with fire. They didn't speak for a long time, not until the sun rose. Tyann looked at Ruth, whose fingers were bloodied but unbowed. You came, Ruth said. Tyann exhaled, finally allowing her hands to shake. I wasn't going to let them bury you. Healing isn't a return to who you were, it's the slow, aching journey to who you were meant to become. The desert wind blew softer that morning, as if the earth itself knew something had shifted. Tyann sat on the edge of a shallow bluff overlooking the fire-blackened skeleton of the outpost they'd left behind. The smoke had thinned by sunrise, but its ghost lingered curling above the rocks in a trail of ash-gray memory. Ruth rested nearby, wrapped in a coarse blanket, her hands raw, and scraped her eye, swollen to a dark plum hue. Still, her chin was high, and her gaze steady when it met Tyann's. I thought I'd die in that place, she said simply, voice ragged from smoke and silence. But then I saw your face. Thought maybe I already had and gone the other way. Tyann gave a tired chuckle. If I'm heaven, you're in trouble. Ruth leaned back against the rock behind her, exhaling slowly. Guess I always figured if I died, it'd be on my feet, gun in hand, raising hell. You were trying to save people, Tyann said. That's about as righteous as it gets. Ellis returned from the ridge with 2 canteens slung over his shoulder and dust caking his boots. No riders behind us, he reported. Danton's gone. Holt, too. What's left of the others scattered like kicked ants. Ruth took the canteen he offered and sipped slowly, wincing as the cool water hit her cracked lips. We can't head straight back to the ranch, Tyann said. They'll watch the old trails. We cut east, follow the dry riverbed for a few days, make 'em think we disappeared. Ruth nodded. I can ride. No, you can't, Ellis said, not unkindly. Ruth arched a brow. Watch me. Tyann handed her a strip of jerky. You'll ride, but you're riding slow, and I'm tying you to the saddle if I have to. Ruth chewed carefully, then muttered bossy. Tyann just smiled. They moved by midday. The sun bore down like judgment, and the trail was hard, winding through brush and brittle rock. But they kept on. Tyann rode beside Ruth's horse, keeping an eye on her posture, her breathing. Ruth never complained, but by the second day her wounds had started to burn with fever. They made camp under a tangle of old cottonwoods where the dried river curled, and Tyen boiled strips of willow bark for a bitter tea. "She's burning up," Tyen murmured to Ellis as Ruth drifted into uneasy sleep. Ellis nodded, crouching beside the small fire. "She needs rest, shelter, and time." Tyen ran a cloth along Ruth's forehead. "We don't have much of any of those." That night, Tyen didn't sleep. She sat beside her friend and watched her chest rise and fall, slow and shallow, and the weight of it, of all they'd escaped, all that might still come, settled on her ribs like stone. In the morning, Ruth's fever broke. She blinked at Tyen in the soft light and whispered, "Still not dead." "Good," Tyen whispered back, "'cause I didn't come all this way to bury you." By the fourth day, Ruth could sit tall again. Her voice was stronger, her humor returning in sharp jabs and quiet smiles. They traveled in longer stretches, the silence between them filled not with tension, but something like peace. At dusk on the sixth day, they came upon a homestead nestled in a basin of golden grass and scrub pine. Smoke curled gently from the chimney. Children's laughter drifted on the breeze. "We're not far from the border," Ellis said. "This is Ramos land. They don't ask questions and they don't talk to lawmen." Tyen considered the house. "You trust them, I do." They were met at the fence by a wiry woman with long, silver-streaked braids and a hawk's stare. Her name was Lydia, and she took one look at Ruth's bruised face and said, "You've been through hell. Come in then. Rest a while." Inside, the walls were lined with woven blankets and soft shadows. The air smelled of maize and sage wood smoke and warmth. Ruth was given a soft bed and hot broth. Ellis helped chop wood while Tyen tended the horses. That night they sat around Lydia's hearth, the three of them, Tyen, Ruth, and Ellis, saying little. Lydia poured strong coffee and told a story about her father outsmarting a flood with a shovel and a stubborn mule. Tyen laughed for the first time in weeks, the sound surprising her even as it left her lips. Later, as the fire burned low, Ruth spoke quietly. "I used to think healing meant going back. Back to who I was before Wes, before all of it." Tyen sat beside her, eyes soft. But now Ruth said, "I think healing is about letting go of that girl. She was brave, but she didn't know how deep the world could cut. I do now." Tyen nodded slowly. "And you're still here." "Yeah," Ruth murmured. "So are you." They sat in silence after that, letting the fire speak for them. At dawn, Ruth rose early and walked to the edge of the basin. Tyen followed. The land stretched before them, open, wide, endless. Ruth squinted toward the horizon. "What now?" Tyen didn't answer right away. "We go home," she said finally. "But not to hide. To build." Ruth smiled faintly. "You and Caleb gonna plant roots? We already did." "Then maybe it's time I stop running too." Behind them, the first rays of light caught on the porch rails of Lydia's home, painting them gold. Tyen turned, eyes catching Ruth's. "I want to fight what Danton started, but I want to do it with something stronger than bullets." Ruth tilted her head. "What shelter? Land. A place where girls like us can stop surviving and start living." Ruth's breath caught in her throat. "You serious as a rattler in your boot?" For a moment, Ruth was quiet. Then she nodded. "You build it, I'll help run it." They clasped hands, scarred, strong, still healing. A hawk cried high above, and the wind carried the sound across the valley. Neither woman flinched. Sometimes rebuilding ain't just raising walls, it's tearing down the ghosts that built them. The land had been quiet when they returned, like it had been holding its breath in their absence. Caleb stood on the porch of the ranch house, a hammer slung at his side shirt, damp with sweat and dust. He didn't say a word when Tayen rode up, just pulled her off the saddle and into his chest. She didn't resist. Ruth dismounted slower, her ribs still sore, her face half-healed. Caleb gave her a look, part worry, part respect, and simply said, "Glad you made it." Ruth nodded. "So am I." The house had changed. The porch had been extended, new beams rising like promises. The chicken coop was mended, the barn patched with fresh wood, and children's laughter rang out from the side pasture where Miriam and her boy played in the wildflowers. Ellis set to work before he'd even caught his breath. He cleared out the burned fencing and helped Caleb dig post holes. Ruth moved slower, but she moved. She found herself at home in the kitchen boiling medicinal roots, baking bread, showing the girls from the nearby settlements how to mend fabric, how to stitch wounds. Still, the nights brought weight. Tayen sat on the back porch most evenings, a worn blanket around her shoulders, watching the moon rise. Ruth joined her more often now, sitting in quiet companionship as the coyotes sang somewhere far off. "You think the peace will hold?" Ruth asked one night, voice low. Tayen didn't answer right away. "I think we'll have to make it hold." Nail by nail, acre by acre, Ruth stared down at her calloused hands. "I never thought I'd come back here." "Not alive." "You did," Tayen said. "And not just alive, you're still fightin'." Ruth gave a tired smile. "I ain't sure what kind of fight this is anymore. The kind that lasts." A wind stirred the dust across the yard. The sky was layered in stars, the kind of quiet beauty you didn't earn easy. That peace cracked when a rider came 3 mornings later. He bore no badge, but his clothes were union cut, and the pistol on his hip was polished like a threat. Caleb met him at the gate while Tayen stayed on the porch, rifle resting across her lap. The rider, who introduced himself as Deputy Marshal Silas Kerr, didn't dismount. "I'm looking for Ruth Crow," he said. Ruth stepped out from the house's shadow before Tayen could move. "I'm Ruth," she said, "but I don't go by that name anymore." Silas raised a brow. "You were part of a federal transport raid. Property was destroyed. Men died, some of them deputies." "They were slavers," Ruth said flatly. "And I ain't apologizing. I didn't come for apologies." Silas's gaze didn't flinch. "I came to tell you the investigation's heating up. Danton's buyers are loud. They're calling you outlaws." Tayen stood slowly, stepping to Ruth's side. "And you, what do you call us?" Silas looked at her, then beyond her at the half-built shelters rising in the field at Miriam, and the girls painting fence slats with bright, mismatched colors. "I call you women who did what the law wouldn't," he said, "and I won't be the one to stop you. But others will try." "Then we'll be ready," Ruth said. Silas nodded once. "I'll buy you time. Can't promise more than that." He turned and rode off into the dust. That night the hammering didn't stop at sundown. Tayen worked late beside Caleb, her arms aching but her resolve like iron. Ruth stood by the cook fire, handing out bowls of stew to children with bare feet and sunburned faces. Later, she wandered into the barn and stood before a pile of worn timber they'd salvaged from an old church up north. The crossbeam had splinters shaped like lightning bolts. She ran her fingers along the grain, remembering sermons whispered through pain, her own screams muffled in a place that wore stained glass like a disguise. She didn't realize she was crying until Tayen found her. "I want to burn it," Ruth said, voice trembling. Tayen didn't ask why. She simply said, "Then let's burn it." They carried the beam outside and set it atop a dry pyre. Ellis joined them, striking the match. The fire rose slow but relentless. As the wood cracked and curled, Ruth whispered, "I thought I needed to carry it, as a reminder. But maybe carrying it is what kept me from healing." Tyann stepped closer. There are better ways to remember. Ones that don't bleed you. Ruth nodded, tears drying in the heat of the flames. For hours the fire burned. The wind carried the smoke toward the hills, where it disappeared into the night. In the days that followed, something shifted in Ruth. She stopped flinching at every knock on the door. She laughed again, real laughter, the kind that left her leaning on the table and wiping her eyes. She taught the children to carve birds from pine shavings. She showed the older girls how to ride bareback, how to keep their heels down and their backs straight. She helped Caleb map out the expansion of the property, talking about shelters with proper floors and warm beds, not just bunkhouses. Tyann noticed. One morning she found Ruth seated on the porch, combing Miriam's boy's hair, humming something slow and familiar. Tyann leaned against the doorway and said, "You're different." Ruth shrugged. "Maybe I just remembered who I was before all the blood." Tyann smiled. "Or maybe you're becoming someone even stronger." That afternoon they planted a cottonwood sapling by the old well. It was Ruth's idea. "Cottonwoods bend," she said, "but they don't break." The roots were deep. They had to be. As they packed the soil around it, Tyann pressed a hand to the earth. "This place, it's not just a sanctuary anymore." Ruth looked up. No, it's a line. One that says you don't cross women who've survived." Ruth's grin was crooked but sure. Damn right. As the sun dipped low and the air cooled, the two women sat beside the young tree watching it sway with the wind. And somewhere beyond the horizon, in towns where money still bought silence, men were whispering about them. About the ranch where girls were safe. About the women who'd made it that way. Tyann didn't care. Let them whisper. She had work to do. Some debts are paid with coin, others with blood, but the deepest ones are settled with silence. The sound of the hammer paused mid-swing. Tyann stood halfway up the scaffold, her gloved hand gripping the frame of the new shelter's roof. Below her, Ellis squinted up toward the eastern trail, where a rider approached slow and solitary, his silhouette sharp against the morning sun. Dust rose in lazy spirals behind the hooves. Tyann climbed down her boots, crunching hard on the dry earth heart, tightening with something she hadn't felt in weeks, unease. Ruth came out from the barn, wiping her hands on her apron. She caught Tyann's expression and turned her eyes to the horizon. The rider was young, maybe 20, his face drawn thin with fear or weariness. He wore a pale brown duster and bore no weapon in sight. But it wasn't his appearance that made Tyann's chest go cold. It was the wax-sealed envelope he carried in his left hand. He stopped at the gate, breath heavy, his voice cracking. "Letter for Ruth Crow. From San Miguel." Ruth stiffened. "I'm Ruth." The boy dismounted and passed her the envelope. They said it was urgent. She stared at it, the seal already broken in one corner from travel. Her fingers trembled as she peeled it open. Tyann watched her face shift, first still, then tight, with something she didn't name. Ruth folded the paper once, twice, then again. "They found Holt," she said finally. "In the canyons north of San Miguel. He's alive, in jail." Tyann exhaled through her nose. "Is that a threat?" Ruth shook her head. "It's a summons. They want a testimony. From me, or they'll hang him without one." Ellis muttered, "I say let him swing." "No." Ruth's voice was low. "If I don't speak the truth, never sees daylight, people will believe Danton's story that Holt and I were just thieves." "You're not going alone," Tyann said. Ruth looked up, her mouth a thin line. "Didn't plan to." 2 days later, they rode for San Miguel. It was a longer journey than their bones remembered. The desert heat pressed down harder, and silence rode with them like a fourth companion. At night, Ruth kept watch while the others slept. Tyann noticed. She always noticed. By the third night, they camped along a dry creek bed, the moon hanging like a coin in the dark velvet sky. Ellis brewed coffee from bitter grounds. Ruth sat across the fire, her eyes unfocused. "You ever see someone die slow?" she asked suddenly. Tyann didn't flinch. "Yes." Ruth nodded. "Holt didn't shoot me when he had the chance. When I ran, he covered my escape. I don't know if that makes him a monster with regret, or just tired of being a monster. Either way, Tyann said he gave you a way out. Doesn't mean he gets to escape the cost." "I'm not giving him freedom," Ruth replied. "Just the truth." San Miguel shimmered in the morning light, a dust-heavy town crouched between two ridges. The courthouse stood at the center, pale adobe and ironwork doors. They tied their horses under a faded cottonwood and stepped inside. The courtroom was warm, heavy with the scent of old wood, sun-baked brick and judgment. Holt sat in the prisoner's dock, gaunt beard, grown chains rattling softly when he shifted. His eyes met Ruth's. Something passed between them. Recognition. Regret. Maybe nothing more. The judge, a heavy man with an even heavier voice, called Ruth forward. She spoke clearly. She did not spare Holt from truth, the beatings, the silence he gave Danton, the cruelty. But neither did she deny the night he helped her escape the bullet. He didn't fire the chains he broke with his own hands. When she finished, the room was silent. The judge leaned back, tapping his gavel twice. "I will not release this man, but I will not hang him either. 30 years hard labor. That is my justice." Holt's head bowed, a whisper of a nod. Outside, Ruth sat on the edge of the courthouse steps. Tyann crouched beside her. "You okay?" Ruth nodded. "It's strange. I thought seeing him would break something inside me. Instead, it settled something. You got to tell your truth." "I did." Ruth turned her face to the sun. "And it didn't shatter me." They stayed in San Miguel that night. Ellis found them a quiet inn. Ruth washed away the dust and memories, her fingers trembling only once as she traced the bruise that had long since faded from her jaw. She slept with the window open, the scent of creosote and pine drifting in on the wind. At dawn, they began their ride home. The trail was harder going back, not because of terrain, but because of what it meant. Ruth knew she was leaving something behind in that courthouse. Not just Holt, not just the past, but the part of herself that had always waited for revenge to mean peace. They stopped at a stream near noon, letting the horses drink. Tyann handed Ruth a fresh canteen. "You changed something back there." Ruth sipped and gave a half-smile. "So did you. You believed I could do it. Speak it." Tyann shrugged. "Always did." They rode until the sun dipped low and the mountains threw long shadows across the land. The ranch came into view like a rising dream, fences taller now, more cabins built, girls out in the garden pulling weeds and laughing loud. Home. As they passed through the gate, Miriam waved from the porch, her son racing barefoot through the grass to meet them. Caleb came out, wiping grease from his hands, face lighting up at the sight of Tyann. Ruth dismounted and stood still for a long moment, just watching. "You think they missed us?" she asked. Tyann smirked. "Only every second." That evening, as the sun bled gold across the land, Ruth walked out to the cottonwood they'd planted. It had taken root well, its leaves trembling in the breeze. She touched the trunk gently. "I told the truth," she whispered, "and I'm still standing." Behind her, Tyann approached quietly. "Some debts are paid with coin," Tyann said. "Others with blood. But what you did, that kind of debt you paid with truth, that's rare." Ruth didn't look away from the tree. Do you think it's enough? Tyen placed a hand over hers. It's more than most ever give. From behind them, the sound of laughter swelled. Ellis shouting something about horseshoes, children yelling in triumph, the clatter of spoons in the kitchen. Ruth turned. I'm ready now, she said. For what? Tyen asked. To build something that lasts. The hardest part ain't surviving what happened. It's letting yourself believe you deserve what comes after. Tyen stood at the edge of the hill, the wind brushing her shawl back as the sun bled gold across the horizon. Below her, the ranch stirred with life, Miriam's boys running after a chicken that didn't want catching, Ellis hammering a new trough into place, and Caleb working the fence like he hadn't once almost bled out beside it. Ruth was in the garden, kneeling beside the raised beds, fingers deep in earth that now bloomed with promise. They'd built something, finally. Not just walls or fields, but a home. Yet Tyen's chest was tight, with something she couldn't quite name. The letter had arrived at dawn, tucked beneath a weather-stained saddlebag, and handed over by a trader on his way west. Addressed to her in careful script. No sender's name. She hadn't opened it. Not yet. Tyen Caleb's voice was soft behind her. She turned and saw him with a hand on Elan's shoulder. Their son grinned up at her, his cheeks sun-kissed, a wooden bird in one hand that he'd carved himself. You comin' in for supper? Caleb asked. She nodded slowly, tucking the letter into her pocket. Soon. They left her with the silence. She finally opened the envelope. The paper was creased, the ink a little smudged. It was from one of the women she'd helped months back, Lena the youngest, among the rescued mail-order brides. The one with the broken wrist and eyes too old for her years. She was writing from a mission town north of Santa Fe. They'd set up a new homestead there, small but safe. She had married a kind-hearted teacher who didn't flinch when she woke screaming. She thanked Tyen not for saving her, but for showing her that survival wasn't the finish line. Tyen folded the letter and held it against her chest. It was too easy sometimes to forget how far they'd come. That night around the long table Ruth had built with her own hands, Tyen sat beside Caleb, Elan pressed to her hip, the voices around her full of laughter and low conversation. They ate stew with wild herbs and bread hot from the stone oven. The lamplight flickered like fireflies, and the walls felt wide with peace. But after the meal, when the younger girls cleaned dishes and Ellis smoked his pipe near the porch, Ruth approached with something on her mind. I think we need to talk, she said, voice measured. Caleb looked up. What's on your mind? Ruth sat across from them, resting her arms on the table. It's time we make this place official. Tyen tilted her head. We have the land, the shelter, the people. But not the name, Ruth said. Not the papers. Not the protection. Caleb's jaw tightened. You want to register it? I want to register it as a sanctuary, Ruth said. Not just a homestead, a place for women, for families, for the ones nobody else has room for? Tyen leaned back, absorbing the weight of it. You think they'll let us? I think we've earned the right to ask, Ruth replied. And if they say no, we make them listen. Caleb looked to Tyen, and she saw the echo of something in his eyes, a man who once ran from everything, now ready to stand for it. I'm with you, he said. The next week was a flurry of preparation. Letters were written, land deeds unearthed. They rode into Mesilla to meet with a lawyer, a Mexican man named Vicente Cruz, whose wife had escaped a trafficker back in the old country. He listened quietly, took their stories without flinching, and promised to help. But as word spread, so did unease. Not everyone wanted change. The first threat came in the form of a rock through the window shards, scattered across the kitchen floor at midnight. Tyen swept them in silence. The second came when one of the younger women, Clara, returned from town, bruised and quiet, her market basket empty. 3 men, she whispered, said we were poison, that we'd draw more broken people here. Called us a disease. Caleb's fists tightened, but it was Ruth who responded with fire in her voice. Then we'll make this place a cure. Still, they moved forward. Vicente returned one evening with documents in hand. It's not done, he said. But the foundation is there. You'll need signatures, witnesses. The judge in El Paso will have final say. El Paso meant risk, a bigger town, more eyes, but also more justice. Tyen sat long by the fire that night, Elan asleep in her lap, Caleb dozing beside them. Ruth joined her, handing her a mug of thick black coffee. You scared? Ruth asked. Of course, Tyen said. But it ain't fear that stops us anymore. Ruth looked toward the stars. You think we'll ever feel truly safe? I think Tyen said that we've earned the right to try. The journey to El Paso would take 3 days. They chose a small group, Tyen, Ruth, Vicente, and Ellis. Caleb would stay behind to keep the ranch secure, though Tyen saw the storm in his eyes when she hugged him goodbye. Ellen clung to her waist. You'll come back. She knelt, cupping his face. Always. That's a promise you can carve in stone. The road south was quiet, at first too quiet. They passed dry riverbeds, old mining sites, and ghost towns swallowed by sand. The wind carried the scent of mesquite and the faint whistle of mourning doves. On the second day, as they camped beneath a low ridge, Vicente read aloud the language of the sanctuary proposal. To provide shelter, healing, and community to those harmed by violence, displacement, or persecution, he read. It's not just a declaration. It's a vision. Tyen stared into the fire. It has to matter. It will, Ruth said, because we lived it. On the third morning, they spotted the smoke column rising from El Paso, and Tyen's heart thudded hard against her ribs. A crossroads lay ahead. Behind them, blood silenced survival. Before them, witnessed defiance change. She adjusted the reins in her hands, eyes fixed on the city skyline that shimmered in the distance. We ride in with truth, she said. Ruth smiled grimly. And we don't ride out until they see it. The ones who tried to break us never understood survival is just the beginning. Now we build. The courthouse steps burned hot under Tyen's boots as the midday sun beat down like judgment. Dust swirled across the plaza, blinding in the glare, but she didn't blink. She stood in the wide open beside Ruth and Vicente while Ellis tied the horses nearby. Her hands trembled at her sides, but her spine stayed straight. Inside that building, just a few paces ahead, a judge would decide whether their sanctuary would be written into law or erased, like it never mattered. Ready, Ruth asked, her voice low, like she feared the walls might already be listening. No, Tyen said truthfully. But let's go anyway. The El Paso courthouse loomed like a fortress, white-stoned and symmetrical, too clean to feel honest. They passed men in suits, women in bonnets, and soldiers in blue. No one met their eyes. Vicente led the way up the marble stairs, holding the rolled petition close like a relic. Inside the room was cavernous, a crucible of echo and formality. A judge in black robes sat behind the bench, stern, gray-eyed, and visibly tired. Tyen scanned the crowd. Some came for other hearings. Others came for this. She spotted 2 of the men from the Messia threats seated in the back like crows waiting for a storm. Vicente stepped forward, cleared his throat, and began. We submit today an application for recognition under the Free Territories Act. This is a request to formally acknowledge a sovereign sanctuary for displaced women survivors of trafficking and families seeking protection. The judge peered over his spectacles. I've read the documents. Strong claim. but unorthodox. Ruth spoke up. So was surviving what we survived. The room stilled. Tyann's pulse thudded in her ears as Vicente continued detailing the legal grounds, the property ownership, the testimonies of those who had lived, bled, and rebuilt that patch of land in New Mexico. He read letters from Lena, from Miriam, from others who found a second life in the haven Tyann and Ruth built with their hands and grit. Then the judge asked for a witness. Tyann stepped forward. She'd rehearsed her words, but when her voice cracked, it wasn't from fear, it was from memory. I was bought by a man I'd never seen, she began. Left at a station like forgotten freight. I didn't cry. I survived. But survival's just the shallowest part. What we built out there on that ranch, it ain't just shelter. It's not charity. It's justice carved from bones. And if you tell me we don't deserve to name it and keep it, then I'd ask what law you're following, because it ain't justice. The judge studied her long after the words stopped. Someone in the back muttered something. Tyann didn't flinch. Then came a second surprise. A woman in the front bench rose. Plain dress, travel-worn. She introduced herself as Leah Colburn, representative of a regional women's commission. She'd heard of Tyann's ranch through whispers, women sent with nothing who came back with calloused hands and eyes that could meet the world again. We support this request, Leah said, voice steady. Not just on legal grounds, on moral ones. The judge leaned back, fingers steepled. I will take it under advisement, he said. They left the courthouse under a sky heavy with tension. Vicente promised a decision within the week. Ruth muttered that the wait would be worse than the ride. Back at the inn, Tyann stared out the window, watching the street lanterns flicker on. Caleb would be in the fields now. Elan would be reading by firelight, and she itched with the weight of not knowing. Can I ask you something? Ruth said, stepping up beside her. Course. Why'd you speak up instead of letting Vicente finish the legal piece? Tyann shrugged. Because law ain't what changed me. That ranch did, and they need to know the difference. Ruth smiled, the lines in her face softening. You said it better than I ever could. They returned home 2 days later. The ride was silent, the desert wide and endless, but a thread of peace had started to sow itself through Tyann's chest. She knew they'd done right. Whether the law agreed didn't change that truth. When the letter came, it arrived by rider. Ruth read it first. Her face unreadable, she passed it to Tyann. The judge had ruled in their favor. Sanctuary status granted. The ranch was now officially recognized under New Mexico's autonomous homestead protection law, unprecedented but valid. The whole ranch gathered by the barn when Ruth announced it. At first, there was stunned silence, then cheers, then weeping. Tyann felt Aylin crash into her side arms tight. Caleb grinned like sunrise, his calloused hand wrapping around hers. That night, they built a bonfire so tall it licked the stars. Miriam's boys danced circles in the dirt. Clara played the fiddle notes, wild and full of triumph. Ruth passed around cider. Vicente gave a short toast in Spanish, tears in his eyes. Tyann sat on the steps of the porch watching it all. Ellis joined her holding a tin cup. You did it. We did, she said. Every damn one of us. You think this changes things, it changes everything. The wind picked up, carrying embers skyward. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were stewards of something sacred. Later, when the fire died down and families drifted to sleep, Tyann remained outside. Caleb joined her, their silence companionable. Remember what you said that first night, he asked. About being half dead, I remember. You don't look it now. She turned to him, eyes steady. Because I ain't. They watched the stars move slow over the land. The sanctuary wasn't perfect. there'd still be threats, still mouths to feed roofs, to patch wounds to mend. But they were rooted now. Tyann felt it in her bones. She rose, brushed the dust from her skirt, and took Caleb's hand. "Come on," she said. "Let's go home." The educational lesson learned from this story is that healing takes time, but it begins with the courage to stand back up and claim your place in the world. Even after deep hurt or betrayal, community and purpose can bring meaning back into a life. When people come together with quiet determination, they can build something lasting, something that outlives fear. And sometimes simply choosing to stay and build is the strongest form of resistance.